Sweet Home is still scary in 2023. How? Despite all of these changes in technology, it is a spooky game. And you might be thinking, hey, this game is limited in graphics or whatever else, but I think that adds to the horror. Keeping this Sweet Home game spooky. Limits are the key to fear caused by this game. An appreciation for these limits will help you to appreciate this game that is now over 30 years old, and see how brilliant this game truly is. So how does limitation affect our sense of fear? When there are unlimited terrifying things out there, limitation seems to be the only safety net. H.P. Lovecraft actually suggested just the opposite, that there are countless unknown things out there, and the limitations of the mind to comprehend these things is a mercy. It's a mercy to humankind. The idea is kind of like we are blessed to not know what horrors lurk outside the boundaries of our sight. I guess ignorance is bliss, right? But this net, this cradle, could also work as a prison or a coffin because, well, let's face it, a coffin, a prison, a cradle, all of these things, they're not that different. So limitations can actually help us not be afraid, but in the end, they can also invoke a ton of fear. Limitations often lead to fear. The inability to move freely might make one claustrophobic, while a limited or a perceived limit or fear of the limit of resources has caused altercation after altercation, fight after fight, and war after war. After all, there is a lot of motivation out of the fear of no food, or drinking water, or money, or, well, really, there's no limit to the amount of limits that can be on us at any point. And Sweet Home actually capitalizes on these things and does a great job with it. Let's start with sound design. The NES has a limited capability when it comes to sound design. While we can appreciate incredible music from this time, like this, the technology of the time was simply limited by the hardware. But this didn't keep Junko Tamaya from creating an incredible soundtrack. She delivered some of the most incredibly effective music for a horror game. Now, this sound design might seem really basic, but it's also incredibly powerful. There's this driving force, this dread with all the unpleasantness and bluntness of these notes that just bears down on us as listeners. Nobody's going to listen to this and be expecting a good time, that's for sure. Even the notes in this exploratory music, it's limited. It's limited. And this furthers the fear of an already inherently bad situation. The pixel art in this game is quite detailed for the time, so despite the limitations, I can't fault the game there. But think about the limitations that the creators were working with here. Instead of trying desperately to fill up every nook and every cranny of the screen, right? They use black, the absence of color. They use this to fill in the gaps. These limits only help to exacerbate the fear and unease felt by players. This game doesn't need flashy graphics. It doesn't need buckets of blood. Instead, it shows us horror that can only be interpreted through 8-bit graphics and a lack of graphics. So our imaginations fill in the rest of the tragedies of these characters, and likely effectively. It's scary stuff, really. It's quite unsettling. There is fear in limits to knowledge as well. The only thing you really know when you get into this game is that you've been sent to document some frescoes, some paintings on the wall. Not to be confused with frescoes.
Wow, it's fresco!
But frescoes. When you get to the house, things go absolutely bonkers. The development of the backstory of this game is found in diary entries, and these paintings, these frescoes that you've been sent to document. Ichiro, the antagonist's husband, left hidden messages in these frescoes. And when you're acting out of a singular motivation, you're likely laboring under a single interest. The characters are forced to navigate this terrifying mansion while slowly discovering bit by bit the story of the mansion and the messed up stuff that took place here. Again, these limits, this lack of knowledge doesn't actually limit the game in fear and horror. It actually helps to develop it, to make it greater. Characters die permanently. How's that for a limit? You start with 5 characters and you can only have 5 characters maximum. These 5 characters have multiple ways that they can die. There are quick time events that characters must react to. As an example, a chandelier may fall onto somebody, or they might have to dodge a flying dagger. You might have to survive walking across some boards unless they break and you actually have to react to pull the people up out of it.
Oh, my other hand isn't strong enough. You take my little hand.
No! Get it away from me!
If they fail these quick time events, they die. Should the character's HP reach 0, they die. And there's no Phoenix down. There's no priest to bring them back. This is Sweet Home, baby. They're dead.
She's dead! Everyone you love around you's dying!
So there is a major limitation here with the characters as well. You can still beat the game with just one character, but apparently it is incredibly difficult to do so. The game sets these limitations and it enforces them. And these limits, terrifying. Each character has a limitation as well. Some characters have more HP but less helpful abilities. Some characters are strong in one aspect but weak in another. And every character is limited, again, by that mortal shell that we call a body. Should a character die, their ability, which was theirs obviously, is passed to another character via an item, like a broom for instance. When a character dies, it also inhibits the amount of characters that you have to fight in battles. And that's tough, because sometimes it's good just to have a warm body for somebody to beat on. And all of this further inhibits the insanely small inventory space that you're given as the player. The limited inventory spaces per character may have been a purposeful choice toward gameplay, but it was also dictated by the limitations of the RAM for the cart and system.
I'm limited by the technology of my time. But one day you'll figure this out. And when you do, you will change the world.
When you assign items to special spots in the game is forced to remember where those spots were. Think about it like Minecraft. If you move a block forever away out in the game is forced to remember that deviation from the normal world. This game does the same, and the amount of information necessary to store these concepts keeps the size of the game relatively small. I don't know that it was out of necessity that this was chosen, but these limitations have become a staple to other games. Zombies are bad, don't get me wrong, but limitations to personal space and inventory management is a personal hell for so many, including myself. Speaking of inventory management, consider this. The only healing items in the game are tonics. You don't get the luxury of sleeping in this night. Again, it's about those limitations. How's this for a limit? There are only 21 in the entire game. The entire game! You can heal your party 21 times total in the entire game using tonics. This is nauseating to think about. My goodness, when should you use those? If you're like me, you likely stockpile things until the end game and then, it doesn't matter. But imagine this. Imagine if there were no ends, there were no cures, and only 21 potions in Final Fantasy. This, along with permanent death at the HP total of 0, makes for a good old nerve-wracking time. But it's a limitation, by hook or by crook, by necessity or by design. And here's what else is limited. We're limited, and that is also scary. Should you decide to take this step and play Sweet Home, which you should, you're limited by the time.
There was time now. There was all the time I needed.
If you're like me, you have very little time, and so you fear the consequences of losing progress. Every character death takes you further away from success. Every use of a tonic takes you further away from success. And with enough failures, your game's over. Players are made constantly to question their decisions, to weigh risk, and to feel the pressure to keep their characters alive in an attempt to escape the Mamiya Mansion. And the limitations of this game's release have continued to influence games for years, and these keep Sweet Home panic-inducing and relevant even after 30 years. Analyzing this game and others is so fun and enlightening, and I think part of this is because gaming discourse is important. We should continue.